Hey, welcome to Calvert After Hours. We're in the digital studio this day. A special guest is joining us, our friend Carol Platt Liebau from the Yankee Institute. Carol, welcome to Calvert After Hours.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah, where we kind of kick things around a little bit. And I know you're going to be having a lot to talk about during the course of the next legislative session, which starts this coming Wednesday. You'll be probably around the halls of the Capitol, kind of harassing our friend Mike Cerulli over there, who's with us as well.
Absolutely.
Hey, we got a bunch of stuff that we want to get to today about what Yankee Institute's doing and where you are on some of the public policy issues going forward. We have a clip of Governor Lamont talking about tax relief and what he wants to. Let's play that first, and we'll get your response to that.
Here's the deal. Everybody overpromises, and they say, I'll figure out how to pay for it later. We've done a pretty good job of underpromising and over-delivering for 7 years, so I'm not going to make any promises I can't keep. Long-term tax cuts, if you want to do it, show me how you're going to pay for it. Just don't leave a hole in the budget next year, which is what I inherited when I came into office. A big hole because the promises people couldn't keep.
Carol, he sounds like someone you can get along with that kind of clip, right?
Right.
I mean, everyone thinks the Yankee Institute's this kind of adversarial, a bunch of Republicans who basically, but he sounds like a very moderate, measured person who basically believes in a lot of things you do. And when it comes to fiscal guardrails, I mean, you are, politics makes strange bedfellows. You're pretty much involved when it comes to what he believes in, right?
I mean,
guardrails.
I thought
That's key.
I thought what he had to say was really sensible, and everybody wants tax relief. Connecticut's people need tax relief, but it only works if it's permanent, if it's transparent, and if it protects the guardrails that are going to protect Connecticut's people the next time we have a downturn in our economy. And I think that's the point he was making, and it's really a solid one.
How do you do that?
I mean, how do you protect the guardrails?
Yeah. How do you make sure, because there's a Democratic majority that is chomping at the bit to just spend a little more and then a little more and a little more, and all this emergency money that's going out. The fear is that's going to be permanent, and that Lamont's going, no, it's just emergency money, right?
Right. Well, I mean, and that's one of the big problems is that we've had these sort of off-budget maneuvers and these workarounds, and that's where the real risk comes, is if we start siphoning off, and that's why we've been talking about this actual pension lockbox, and where you make sure that you have money that is set aside where it can't be spent in off-budget maneuvers, and you don't have the situation where you start spending temporary money for permanent programs. That's how we've gotten ourselves into these problems, and it's certainly not the way that we're going to be able to fund our pensions and set ourselves up for long-term success.
So I read a little bit about the pension lockbox proposal, and I was reading, and I said, making sure revenue goes straight into the pension funds with no diversions, and I thought, isn't that what the fiscal guardrails are supposed to be? So, and you're smiling right now because I think you get the point of the question, which is, how do you ultimately ensure, from your perspective, that the revenue actually goes into savings and pension debt when that was the intention of the guardrails? Yes, there was provisions put in that legislation originally to allow them to do what it is that they're doing now, but what makes a lockbox a lockbox?
Well, that's a good question for the legislators,
right.
But you try and put in some of the assurances and you try and prohibit some of the workarounds and the off-budget spending that has undermined the efficacy of the spending caps and of the other constraints that were supposed to be these safeguards, and that some legislators have proven very adept at working around. Because, as we've seen, what happens is that if we erode the guardrails, in the future, it's going to end up being a lot of strain and a lot of cost for Connecticut's taxpayers to get us back where we need to be.
Because you've warned in previous sessions about a return to the tax and spend habits of the past. I think the key thing is you're trying to say is, how do we stop that from happening?
Right, because we saw where we were a decade ago, where we were constantly facing these crises of being confronted with a really unpleasant choice of constant tax increases or program cuts. And that's not what we want to see going forward. It's not what the people of Connecticut want, and it's certainly not the kind of future we want to leave for our children and grandchildren.
I think the legislature said that this section, the short session, they're going to spend some time on the issue of affordable housing. And I know that the Yankee Institute has done a lot when it comes to that. Where do you think the legislature is going to go? Where does Yankee want to see them go?
Well, the important thing is to make sure we don't have mandates that go down without funding and without flexibility, because that's a great way to make sure that local taxes rise stratospherically, even if state taxes don't. And so what we need to look at are solutions that are locally aligned, because that's the way we're going to actually make sure housing ends up getting built in our different municipalities without sacrificing affordability and without sacrificing the local character that makes Connecticut so special.
But there's always this like tug and pull between state mandated housing policies and municipal control, and so that's going to be picking the winner on that one.
Right, and it's going to be difficult, but I think, we have very capable legislators in Hartford, and we have also very capable local leaders, and it's going to be up to both of them to work together in a responsible way to find locally aligned solutions that make sure that we're finding ways to get the housing built, rather than spending a lot of time on the one hand trying to jam down solutions that don't work for our communities, and on the other, the communities having to spend their time and resources fighting those one-size-fit-all mandates rather than being able to go ahead and implementing solutions that actually work for their towns.
Is there a dissonance at all? And I talked with the Majority Leader Jason Ross, of course, a Democrat. And one of the points he makes in this debate is, if you look at what Republican governors have done in western states like Montana and the Dakotas and Wyoming, is there a dissonance at all between the idea of local control and the conservative principle of free markets that says, if you own a piece of land within reason, you're not going to be able to put a gas power plant up without some permitting, but within reason, you should be able to develop that how you want without the government coming in and saying, you must have this number of parking spaces and you must have this, kind of exterior design. We hear all the time developments opposition to it saying it doesn't really quite fit the aesthetic or the character of our community. Is there a dissonance there? Is there a disconnect?
Well, I think, there's always this interplay, because at a certain point, you have the right to move your hand however you want, just as long as it doesn't come in contact with my face. And so, of course, there are these issues where you should be able to develop your piece of property in a way you see fit. But then there also is the issue of, where does that start to impact my next door neighbor's property or my, the community as a whole. And those are really difficult issues. But I have confidence we have really strong local leadership in our state. And I think those issues can be worked out in ways that are satisfactory among neighbors and within local communities, and then between the communities and the state.
Quick break. We'll be back with our friend Carol Platt Liebau from the Yankee Institute. Don't go away. Back with a little Kepler After Hours with our friend from the Yankee Institute, Carol Platt Liebau, president of the Yankee Institute, who's kind of to join us this morning. And as the legislative session comes into session next Wednesday, a lot of stuff going on. Here's Lamont talking about budgetary spending, and we'll get some reaction when we get back.
Well, remember, we've already got a budget. It's 95% baked. The good news, Paul, is we have pretty strong economic growth, so we have strong income. So it's going to allow us to do probably $1 billion more than we did last year. Most of that's already been accounted for and built into our budget, but we have a little bit of flexibility there.
So obviously you wouldn't want them messing around, right? What they have is good. Let's just get into session and get out.
Well, the thing is that the fiscal guardrails work. They really work. But as long as you have a situation where spending stays on budget and transparent, where we run into trouble is where we start, again, funding permanent programs with temporary money, and when we start creating all of these off-budget funds to do things and steadily chipping away at the accountability and the transparency that the fiscal guardrails and the stability that we've all worked really hard to rebuild.
I know that the Yankee Institute doesn't endorse political candidates.
No, we're nonpartisan. We're 501c3, and we're proud of working with people from both sides of the aisle. Anyone who will work with us, Mike, we're delighted.
I want to ask you, though, about there's a candidate running for governor, Aaron Stewart, who now I've heard her say this twice, which she talks about the issue of the fiscal guardrails, and actually heard her say this on Thursday night. We're taping this on Friday morning. She says the fact that we have so much surplus money means that we overtax, and she wants to take that money, presumably would have to alter the fiscal guardrails to do this, and deliver it back to people in the form of a tax cut. Do you agree with that assessment that the successive budget surpluses we've had come from a overtaxation?
Well, I mean, sometimes, it's important to look. So if we're going to talk about tax cuts, and I think it's important that we do, then you talk about tax cuts, you have to look at the cost drivers. And all of us want tax cuts. And I think, like other kinds of tax relief, the people of Connecticut, there's a good case to be said that they need tax relief or tax cuts. But the question is, what kind? And if you get into talking about a one-time rebate, the question is what it really does to address the cost of living overall. And if you start talking about a tax cut, then the question is, what are you going to do to address the long-term cost drivers? And we have, a number of long-term, cost drivers in the state.
That's a good segue into the second cut on when they asked Lamont about an income tax repeal. Isn't much of this?
No, I don't think so. It's come up every 4 years since Lowell Weicker put in the income tax, and John Rowland ended up raising the income tax, and Jody Worrell ended up raising the income tax, and Dan Malloy ended up raising the income tax. We're the only guys that have cut the income tax, not for everybody, but for middle-class people.
But it always comes up every year, right? They just let's get rid of the income tax. It'd be very difficult.
I mean, it would be wonderful, right? We
love to get rid
of the income tax.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when you start looking at getting rid of the income tax, it's a question of not of ideology or slogans. It's really a question of costs and sequencing, because we have a number of long-term cost drivers in our state that make it very difficult. I mean, you have these issues with your labor agreements, with energy costs, and a number of other things. And the question is, how do you start bringing these structural pressures under control? And if you don't start thinking about serious ways that you can do that first, then any discussion about eliminating the income tax just at the beginning starts risking looking a little bit performative or even unserious. And that's the problem with it. I mean, really, cost discipline has to precede talk of eliminating the income tax, not the other way.
And you put a
around.
recent study out about energy costs in Connecticut, and we did the Big Boy program on Capital Report. It was very interesting that there was agreement across Republicans and Democrats. Even my friend Brandon McGee, who probably would never think to agree with anything the Yankee Institute did, he gave you kudos. That's a great report. They're making a lot of comments. How can we reduce those costs? People have been talking about this since like El Grasso.
Right. And, I was pleased to see Brandon do that. Come on in. The water's warm
Yes,
over
it
here
is.
with
I know.
Yankee
Yeah, he
Institute.
agrees.
But one of the things that are really important to look at are these sort of politically driven charges that are driving up our energy costs, things like the public benefit charge and a number of other mandates. And these are really not terribly transparent, and they're not very often reviewed. And what we really need is more transparency and a more regular review of a lot of these charges, because some of them may not be necessary anymore. They can be sunsetted. And the more recent study that Brandon was referring to, having to do with New England energy costs and reliability, talked about the fact that a lot of the energy costs are being driven by some of these public benefits charges and mandates.
All right, Mike, wrap this session up here.
You on the same page when it comes to supply side of the energy problem too, and that natural gas being part of the solution. I found it was very striking when the governor launched his reelection campaign that amidst talking about fighting Trump and healthcare and all these things, he mentioned maybe we'll have some natural gas come into the state. What do you make of that when you hear it?
We're all of the above people, because it's very difficult with the portfolio of renewables we have right now to get to net zero. And natural gas and nuclear definitely needs to be part of that solution.
But nuclear and potentially a natural gas power purchase agreement would be, under the current system, paid for through a charge on the public benefits.
But that is a true public benefit. I mean, when you talk about that, that isn't like some little, private program or something like that that hasn't been reviewed, that lacks transparency. When you talk about charges that go to stand up our nuclear power in a way that is going to end up generating cheaper, long-term, clean energy, that is actually the real definition of what a public benefit is.
We'll take a break right here, and we'll come back for a short little block where we'll get your last words on the legislative session and ask if legislators spend too much time filing too many bills. Don't go away.
Welcome back to Capitol Report After Hours. We're with Carol Platt Liebau of the Yankee Institute. I want to talk. We talked about the report that you put out on energy,
Right.
And I feel like a lot of folks that work in Connecticut politics and Connecticut government policymaking, they know the Yankee Institute, maybe through reading on Tom's site, as a place for generating reports and research. I'm interested in a question of there was all this discourse left, right, and center when President Trump won his second term of the staffing up of the administration and all the nonprofits that were involved and sort of basically sorting resumes and getting folks ready in this professional development pipeline. You are looking right now at the prospect of potentially having a Republican governor for the first time in 20 years. So that would require them to staff up all the commissioners and deputy commissioners and staff assistants and all the way on down. I wonder, is Yankee doing any work, maybe with some of the gentlemen in the corner of the room here, on that sort of bench building, not from an electoral standpoint, because as we talked about, that's not an arena you can play in, but in terms of the professional development of if Aaron Stewart or Ryan Fazio or Betsy McCoy or whomever becomes governor next year, is Yankee going to play a role in staffing up that administration and sort of providing the expertise in-house at that point?
Well, we'd be delighted to help any governor of any party in any way we could. Our goal at Yankee Institute is to make Connecticut more livable, more affordable, and more workable. And so to the extent that we can be helpful in providing policy ideas, policy personnel, and any kind of studies, personnel ideas, ways to serve the people of Connecticut, that's what we're here to do. And so if we can be helpful to either side in any way, that is our mission, that is our goal, and we would be delighted to do that, Mike.
Any hiring suggestions for the governor?
Yeah, I think we would encourage the governor to reach out to Yankee. I mean,
we would be delighted, and we appreciate the governor makes efforts, I think, to be open to various perspectives, and that's important in any leader. And we welcome the opportunity to work with this governor, and we would be delighted to have the opportunity to work with a Republican governor to make sure that the people of Connecticut are, again, as I was mentioning the first time, able to have a Connecticut that is affordable, livable, and workable. That is what Yankee Institute is about, and we will work with people of either and both parties to make that happen.
Do you feel Connecticut has a good sort of firmament of young, conservative, or free market-minded folks coming up those pipelines? Because we talk about this, right? We do all these stories on young people in politics, and it skews fairly Democratic, right, because of just the numbers in this state. But I wonder, as someone who's been in this business for a while, what do you see right now coming up the pipe for?
No, I think that there are people, smart people on both sides of, if you would talk about, the ideological aisle, and it's important that in my view, that people on both sides be encouraged to think deeply about issues and speak to one another and speak across those divides. Because I think too often now there's this impulse to segregate and not to speak across. And it's important, if we're going to work together, that we understand the perspectives of people that we don't necessarily agree with. And there's nothing frightening about someone who doesn't agree with you. They just may have a different way of trying to reach the same goal. And it's important that we all understand how we're trying to serve the people of Connecticut, however we see fit.
Do you look at having Zoom public hearings along with in-person people hearings a good thing to extend the reach, or would you rather see just everybody come to the Capitol?
I think having Zoom public hearings are incredibly important. And here's why. Because the way the hearing process works, it is very difficult for a lot of normal, everyday people who have jobs and families and commitments to be able to take the time.
I'm not sitting there.
Right, to take the time and put aside a whole day, perhaps, and leave, if they're a small business person, to leave their business, or if they're a stay-at-home mom, to find someone to take care of their children, to get in their car, travel to Hartford, sit for an undetermined amount of time to be able to testify. And I think this allows our lawmakers to be able to hear from a much wider variety of people and to have the benefit of a much broader variety of perspectives.
But there is something to be said for petitioning your legislature in person and confronting someone in the hall and looking him in the face. Many people say, including my friend Joe Simmers, has said a lot of the police accountability bill probably wouldn't have passed if the legislature was in session and people were able to go there and basically look people in the eye and say, that's not a good idea, or let's tweak that a little bit.
Well, and I think it's important that legislators be in Hartford. I wouldn't.
In the Capitol.
In the
Not
Capitol.
in their offices.
In the Capitol. I think it's very important that people who do have the ability to come to the Capitol and for lawmakers to be able to have those informal interactions together, and for those who were motivated and have the means and the time to get to the Capitol to be able to have the opportunity to interact with their lawmakers.
So we got about 2 minutes left. I'll ask you one question and I'll let you have the last minute. Quality versus quantity of legislation. I love it when Yankee says, you guys file too many bills up there, National Cat Day or something like that, and you'd rather see less bills and more really good bills.
Well, it's just part of
Hate
having...
to pick on cats, though.
Well, I'm a dog person.
Okay,
so,
me too.
But it is important when you have just this incredible deluge of bills, right? It's very hard for people to keep track of them. It's very easy for all, to sort of have the process drown out quality in this storm of quantity. And we care a lot about transparency and accountability. And it's too easy for both of them to be lost if you just have this storm of bills. And so it's much more efficient, much more effective, and much more conducive to the cause of good government if you have bills that people can follow, that people can weigh in on, and where the public can truly have eyes, ears, and voice.
Well, this is, I think I know the answer for this. Like the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. What makes a good session for the Yankee Institute? And when we look back on this in the first week of May, what will you look to have accomplished? And, again, first do no harm, right?
Right. I mean, it seems that one of the best things that our legislature can do is protect those fiscal guardrails. Look, Connecticut's future is much less about bold promises than it really is about quiet discipline. And it's the discipline to protect the fiscal guardrails that has made our current stability possible. It's about respecting local communities, and it's about lowering the everyday cost of living for Connecticut's families. If we can do those things, then this will be a session that has been very well spent.
Well said. Yankee Institute's President Carol Platt Liebau, thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure, gentlemen.
Encourage more of my Democratic friends to reach out. Thanks, Carol.
Thanks so much, guys.